Okay, it is 4 o'clock, so we will get started. I'd like to acknowledge this land that we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Gawler people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Gawler people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Gawler people today. Okay, let's look at who's here. So we have Paul, we have Helen, Jacinta, Natasha, Adrian, and David. Apologies, Judy Gellert, Philip Ferguson, and Jeffrey Randall, it looks like. Any motions to grant leave of absence? None. Any leave of absence? None. Okay, so we have no non-attendance. Yeah. Oh, depending on Karen. Any declarations of interest? Okay. Would anyone like to confirm the minutes from February? Yes. Helen and Paul. Okay. Oop, I've just undone that. Paul. Okay, let's look at the business of... All in favour? Thank you. I should get L plates. Okay, move on to declarations of interest.
We've gone through that one. So
oh yes, yeah, business arising from minutes. Do we have any? No? No business arising from the minutes. So we'll go to... which one? Number 6, decision reports, business 6.1 business case, which we'll ask David to talk to.
thank you. Through the chair, as per the committee resolution a couple of months ago, we worked through a business case around additional staff resourcing at the Cultural Heritage Centre. There's definitely a need and a desire for that additional staffing. The recommendation in the business case that was attached to the report is to actually expand the Heritage Centre coordinator role by that point too. That whilst not the so-called financially cheapest option, is the best option from operations in the future. In the event that Jacinta left the organisation, attracting a new staff member at point 8 would be less likely than a full-time role in the space, and gives the best outcomes in terms of strategic development of the collection and its management, as well as managing volunteers, etc., down in that space. Having said all that, and understanding that we have got increased visitation and a demand, the way Council's resourcing sits at the moment, I was not able to recommend this to be presented as part of the budget process. At this time, we need to wait until Council's in a financial position that it can afford, from my perspective, to invest in this resource. So that's why the recommendation is that acknowledging the need for the increase, however, due to Council's current funding priorities and constraints, not pursue it at this time. But happy to have any further discussion with the committee.
Did anyone want to speak to that? Am I allowed to speak to that? Yeah. Okay. I just have a question about the due to current funding priority, the wording. I understand the intent behind it, and I appreciate the intent behind it, but the wording, just saying that instead not pursuing inclusion, do we have to include that necessarily? Can we make it a bit more something to be considered? I'm not sure what I want to pursue there myself, but does anyone else feel no?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I agree. I think it's the role of this committee to support the business case, and it's then will be up to Council to make that final decision about funding priorities. And so maybe the way around that is to just acknowledges the need for increased staffing resources to point 2 and seeks Council's consideration of this matter, or something like that. Simply because I think if this committee doesn't support the need, it may not be sending the right signal. And I'm comparing it to another committee of council which supported an extra staffing resource, and then when it got to council, it didn't come above the line. But I think in terms of positioning ourselves well with this business case, which I think we all, certainly, I hope I can speak that it's very clear, I think we have to do that level of support, because council won't necessarily read this business case, but it might, this type of slight change might allow Councillor Kosh and myself to speak to council and perhaps underline the need. I think we're all very much aware of the current situation, but knowing what's happening this year and perhaps next year, I think we need to make our case. Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Are we happy to change the wording at all? Would anyone like to?
Okay, maybe for the point. So it's the second dot point would finish at the words Gawler Cultural Heritage Centre. The rest would disappear. And instead we would seek, instead of this full stop, put and seeks council consideration of this matter. And David, I'm very happy to help if you would think that needs to be wordsmithed slightly different. And seeks council's consideration of this matter. I think that's still fairly low key. It could be strengthened if anyone feels that it does, but and support, yeah. Or you could support the need, rather than acknowledge the need, you could support the need, perhaps.
What about acknowledge and support? Because you can acknowledge it and consider it, but still come out with a negative. But to say that you support it as well is to say, well, we're acknowledging and considering, but unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's so acknowledges and supports the need.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Anyone else?
Who would like to move that? Adrian? Anyone second?
Through the chair, if I may, before we get to the formal resolution, just bear with me. This resolution as it stands would be a committee resolution, and it remains with the committee, and it'd only be acknowledged at council level as part of the en bloc noted committee resolutions, because it's not making a recommendation to council. So we just need to wordsmith for a moment. I was just getting my head around what the intent was. So if you want council's consideration, whilst we can say seeking council's consideration, we'd have to bring it to council somehow, which is via recommendation. So it would be that the Gawler Heritage Collection Committee recommends to council that it notes the business case, acknowledges and supports the need, and then third dot point, and considers the matter. Or third seeks, it wouldn't be seeking council, because it's a recommendation of council that it considers the business case.
Yes, which then would put the business case in front of the council. Thank you, that's exactly.
Would anyone like to second that motion?
Sorry, I better do. I'll second the motion, thank you.
All in favour? Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay, we will now move to 6.2. Permission to publish St. George copybooks Barber family. That the Gawler Heritage Collection Committee recommends to Council that high resolution images of the following items be provided to Miss Julie Martindale. Oh, just sorry, Jacinta, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Chair. These are exercise books that were made by the children of St George's, so they have no historic merit except to the families of these children and their descendants who like to see their handwriting. So we have had requests for these types of images before, and the committee has wholeheartedly agreed on supplying those images to the family. So staff ask that the committee give their recommendation that these images of the copybooks and the children's handwriting be supplied to the family.
Anyone would like to address it, Helen?
Yeah, I'm happy to move this, and I particularly note in the discussion the sentence that says that Mr Martindale has already shared with the Cultural Heritage Centre all her compiled research on Samuel Barber Senior. So again, it's continuing this line of mutual cooperation, and she in fact has obviously given us what she has done. So it puts in fact those copybooks in a much better explanation of who they are and why they're within our within our collection. So very happy to support the motion, to move the motion.
Who would like to second that? Paul Kosh, thank you. All in favour? Okay, another one, 6.3, permission to publish Ada Wordy file. Jacinta, would you like to address that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an interesting one. Ada Wardy did not live in Gawler. She was only here to participate in concerts to raise funds for the Steinway piano. She is a fascinating woman. She travelled right across South Australia doing fundraising concerts for a number of different causes. She came with her family from the Caribbean at the late end of the 19th century. Her father was a lay minister and was quite active in the political sphere in trying to ensure that all people from British colonies enjoyed the same rights within the new colonies of Australia, regardless of their ethnic background. So a fascinating family. I'd really like to do an exhibition on her one day. And I have spoken to the family potentially about doing that. It would be digital. But these items are not in the public realm, but they are. This is an important history, I feel, that's being written, and I'm asking the committee to support the family's application that they have images that will be included in a published. It's only to be published for family, but Genealogy SA will have one, the State Library will have a copy, and the Gawler Heritage Collection will have a copy of this book. And knowing the history of the family, there's potential for this book to go further than that, and I think it would be wonderful if we were part of that story in academic research.
Paul, sorry.
Just to clarify, are there any pictures of Ada at all or not?
So through the chair, the family have pictures that they have supplied to us for our records, not pictures of her performing, no.
Yeah, I was just going to say the pictures of the Steinway are very rare because we looked for them, and I think there is only one, the more modern one. And it's surprising, isn't it? Mm.
Anyone else want to speak to that? No? Would anyone like to move that? Adrian? Second? Paul? Thank you. All in favour?
Chair, can I just, sorry, I'm coming in very late with this, but again, it's that, it's one of the themes that we'll just touch on later in the heritage plan of multiculturalism in Gawler, which I agree with Jacinta. It's going to be an area that I think in time we're going to be able to better explain, and I think this will help in that. There are going to be some other examples, but yeah, I think it's great.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to information reports, Cultural Heritage Centre budget update, and we're looking at Natasha.
Thank you, through the Chair. Just the end of 31st of March 24 financial year to date budget report. There's many costs that obviously are not in there as yet for the financial year. Jacinta and Petra are extremely busy. This is the busiest quarter, and this is the majority of the spending happens in this quarter. However, to note, obviously, the continued support from the volunteers is always incredible, and they certainly couldn't do what they get done in the centre without the hours and dedication of the volunteer team. So we're very grateful. And also to note the grant funds that were received from the Copland Foundation, the first of 2 invoices, and there will be payment for once that work is done and completed, and we're very grateful for that as well. And it was a great application that Jacinta prepared for that, and that was approved.
Helen.
Yes, can I just ask perhaps for a bit more information about the foundation, the Copland Foundation grant, because the 6,000 we've got here is simply half, isn't it? So perhaps a bit more background information.
So through the Chair, if I may, as I've been communicating with the Foundation's process is to deliver half of a grant on approval of a grant and the second half at the acquittal of the work. So when we have a signed declaration from Art Lab that the work has been completed, they will then pay us the second half, which we will then pay to Art Lab and very excitedly go and collect our picture frame.
Anyone else like to speak to that? No? Anyone like to move? Natasha, you've got, that's it? Yeah. Anyone like to move? Helen? Second? Adrian. Thank you. All in favour? Gawler Heritage Collection Management Plan, and we are going to talk to Jacinta.
Thank you. Through the Chair, a few months back the committee asked for an update on the management plan. We do provide an update every year in the annual plan, but this was a more thorough just based on the management plan. So it outlines the actions that have been completed, the ones that we're undertaking at the moment, and then I felt that this was an opportunity for the committee to discuss the outstanding actions and which ones they would like to prioritise, given, as we've said, that we are under significant time resource challenges in the Cultural Heritage Centre due to the growth in our visitor numbers. So this was an opportunity. At the time that we developed the plan, there were certain actions in there that were necessary, and I bring to your attention the Action 6, the vision and mission statements. That was a requirement of the History Trust for MAC accreditation. It's not currently a requirement anymore. Do the committee think we need to have those? A lot of collections do, but that's because they were formed by community collections that were then handed on to council. That's not the case with our collection. So perhaps the committee would like to have a discussion around that. And then I thought if you'd like to have a discussion about the other priorities that you see that staff should then attempt to get done in the best possible timeframes. We'll still get to everything eventually, but we need to think about the timeframes and the actions, which ones we commit to. And I thought it was also important that some of them really require an ongoing understanding of the collection through the whole cataloguing process. The statement of significance is particularly important. We all believe that the Gawler Heritage Collection is nationally significant. To make that argument is not easy. It will require vigorous academic research, which we will put a budget bid in at a later date to get funding for. So we need to be able to provide that person with as much knowledge about the collection, and we are still discovering things in the collection weekly. It's, as I say often, it's the joy of the Gawler Heritage Collection. You just don't know what's there. And so that is a particular one that I think needs to go down the track. So it's not that we're not paying attention to it, it's just that we're discovering more and more about this collection, and more things are coming in from the community that add to the importance of the Gawler Heritage Collection, which is, my understanding, is something that the original committee members and council always knew would happen, that there were things in the community that were important parts of the history, and that when the community was aware that there was a safe and respected place for those items to go, they'd come to us, and they are coming to us, and we're very grateful for that, because they're rounding out the knowledge of what we know about Gawler, the people in Gawler, the activities that took place in Gawler. So it's building up that picture. So I leave it to the committee to have a discussion about which of these actions they feel need to be prioritised.
Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Through to Jacinta. Obviously, from my view, the statement of significance is probably the most important, but obviously you need to do number 2 first. But this, could you just explain why it hinges on that grant from the National Library Community Heritage Grant?
So through the Chair, it doesn't hinge on that, but the National Library does offer grants for statements of significance every year. Most of those go to aiming for an internal statement of significance, just an overall statement of why this collection is important to this community, or potentially why it's state significance, but they will also fund for national significance. So some years back, a statement of significance for the Gawler Heritage Collection came from a National Library grant, and I believe Helen would be the best person to speak about that. But that only went as far as talking about the significance of the collection to Gawler and parts of it to the state. And the feeling on review of that from Schumann Associates when they reviewed that document was that enough information wasn't provided so that the person conducting that significance statement didn't have the knowledge and background information to really interrogate whether the collection was of national significance.
Just to follow up. So the process would be to do the action to the history of the collection to get all that background knowledge before you then go for the grant. Is that how it works?
So through the Chair, it would be a number of factors. We would want more of the collection catalogued so that we knew exactly what was in there. The history of the collection is that's an internal document for us and community to understand some of the naming protocols. It is the history of the Institute part of the collection is an important part of the statement of significance. Our collection's quite unique in that it's got 3 streams: the Institute collection, the Civic collection, and the local history collection. And so part of the challenge will be bringing that all together to make an argument for why all 3 of those integrate and form a nationally significant collection. So there are collections across Australia that have nationally significant items, and we certainly do. And there are local history collections in most communities. I'd make the argument that ours is a much stronger collection than most local history collections because this community has valued its heritage so much, and also because we have things like a local author collection. We also have a war reference collection. So we have things in our local history collection that are much broader than many communities do. And so we're very grateful for that. Our civic collection is pretty much like any other civic collection.
Just a little bit more on that. So where are we up to with the history of the collection? Are we anywhere?
So through the Chair, no, we haven't even started that, no.
And just to check, you haven't started the statement?
No. So we're struggling to find the time to write significant statements for objects in the collection, and they would certainly be needed before you had a statement of significance for the entire collection.
Helen.
I'm very pleased that this report's come to us. I think it's exactly what we need to do. We need to revisit because we know we've got some excellent work happening and we have to readjust as we go along. Given the budget, the business case, we can see where the pressures are. I think the staff have done some excellent work in areas that we didn't even plot out initially. So the working with other parts of council and bringing added value into council projects with engineering and planning has taken some time. So, of course, we need to sit down and adjust. My suggestion, for what it's worth, but very happy to hear from others, is that it is time to look at the history of the collection. I think that's something that perhaps the staff could start with. There are bits and pieces. So Janice Schumann did put together, from her understanding, but I think there's some timeliness to that, because I think we need to reach out particularly to the surviving members of the Institute Committee and get their input. So it needs to be a history of the collection from many different points of view, if that makes sense. So that would be one of my priorities. I like the fact that we now have said, well, some of these things need to be delayed. Very much the statement of significance. When Denise was before Denise came in, I mean, she was able to bring a fresh pair of eyes and pointed out to us that our German history is actually certainly most significant here and ties into certainly the state, if not a national. It's a part of history that hasn't been really considered to this point, just touched upon, the German settlement in this area. So my second thoughts would be, especially with the next collection coming up, a next exhibition, which is the Gawler Rivers, that Action 10 might be something that perhaps we could also tick as another one. And just as a third, the archaeological objects that have been discovered and come to light, I think maybe it's time to have a report on that to see if we can... We didn't foreshadow that we would be having archaeological objects, but they've come, and in fact I think there's some out there in the community that would come in as well. So my suggestions that if we're going to put A, B and C is that we put 2, 10 and 11. The third one though, which is the pianos. The pianos. Listen people, I'm going to suggest something really radical here. I think while I agree that we haven't got the time to start, and in fact there's some problems in undergoing community engagement at the moment with that, I think we need to revisit this topic. I think we need to come to a point of, do we seriously deacquisition the Steinway? I think we have been around this several times. In fact, we're not the only ones. The Institute Committee went round and round and round in a circle about 3 times, I think, over history. I think rather than trying to... I think we need to toughen up and say, what on earth would we do if we got $80,000, which I think council is always going to be a very low priority for council, or even if we got $80,000 from some other source, what would we do with the Steinway? We've got the Bechstein. Do we need a second? Do we need a very large ornament and expensively restored ornament, or don't we? So I think my feeling is that we need to, rather than push this down the road, is to perhaps take a hard line on it. But again, I throw that for some discussion, perhaps.
Paul.
Yeah, I just want to, thanks for opening that up, but wasn't there a time when somebody would be taking a Steinway and fixing up the Bechstein? Or wasn't there some...
Is that office still
Is that office still there?
So through the chair, yes, that was an offer from Lever and Sons to take the Steinway, but the Bechstein doesn't really need much more work. So I think it would, and obviously we'd need some professional advice, but it may well be more advantageous for the collection to simply sell the Steinway and use that money for conservation in the collection.
Jacinta.
If I may, through the chair, the big challenge that we have is that the Steinway is in storage, on its side, wrapped in plastic. So nobody is going to give us a proper assessment on the conservation of it or a good assessment of its value for sale. What the committee might like to consider is whether we, in the next financial year, out of the operating funds of the Cultural Heritage Centre, do enough work to make the Steinway leg stable and have the Steinway upright, so that the appropriate people could then come and assess it. And in saying that, we would need to find a space for it to be upright. And it would really need to be a ground floor space. The Steinway was craned out of this building. We do not need to crane it back in to then sell it, use it for conservation or anything else. So we would need to find a ground floor space so that's maybe something that we could explore doing, and I could make some inquiries about stabilising it so it's safe for the people to have a look at, and where we could potentially have that, so that then some learned people on Steinway pianos and values could give some advice.
Adrian.
I don't think the Bechstein is necessarily a brilliant piano. I think, because my daughter Sophie played it, and I think the keys at the end aren't so flash or something. I don't know, but I'm not sure whether the Bechstein's one to be going on with.
My question would be, do we need a playable piano? It seems to me that if we were looking for a pianist to play, they would either bring their own or bring an electronic piano. So what we're talking now is historical items. And we were gifted, or the Institute Committee was gifted with two of its time, and that's always been problematic about two. My feeling is the Bechstein has found a home in the reading room and is quite an attractive attachment, but it's not will never be something that's played on a regular basis. And the Steinway is even in a worse situation. So anyway.
Paul.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, the Steinway, is the frame bent or something? And neither of them will be concert standard again, will they? They're beyond that, so we just need to,
So through the chair, and this all happened prior to my coming to council, so I'm going on second-hand advice, but the leg of the Steinway is not stable, and so it couldn't be righted, because we did consider, when we moved the Steinway from one storage facility to another, whether we could just put it upright at that stage, but it wasn't. And it's a big piano and it's a very heavy piano, so obviously it needs to be structurally sound before we can have people looking at it.
Helen.
Yeah, David, have you got some suggestions about
Yes. So
place?
through the chair, a couple of things. Jacinta's right, we had that assessment done. There's a couple of elements of the Steinway. Number one, from my recollection, there's a bracket missing to attach the leg to the piano, and that's the issue about stabilisation. It's missing parts. So if we were to upright it, we may have to buy the appropriate part or some kind of interim measure, knowing that an investor may buy it without that and then appropriately restore it. From my recollection in the reporting, there was a slight curvature to the top of the Steinway that would need to be addressed as well. That's historic damage from when it was stored underneath the stage in the Institute building that we're sitting in at the moment, where the stage used to be, and it was left there for a long time as well. In terms of general storage, for it uprighting and visibly accessible, the only spot that immediately comes to mind would be the atrium at the administration centre, which is a large foyer space that we actually housed the Visitor Information Centre for a while whilst that rebuild occurred. The reason I'm suggesting that is it is generally accessible only in office hours when people are around. So the risk to the piano is lessened by just the fact that people coming and going are visibly noticed by our customer service team or the Department of Child Protection or Workskill, who are all in that building. It's somewhat secluded and protected from light as well. It does have windows on one side, but the light path itself wouldn't be a major issue because they're north-facing windows. So the direction of the sun would be shielded quite well from that. And there are trees out in that courtyard as well that provide natural shade. And it's an area that's not used for any specific purpose. So that could be an opportunity. It is ground floor. There are automatic doors that may be wide enough to get the Steinway through. I'm not sure about height-wise though. We'd have to check and measure, but that would be my number one suggestion as a temporary storage. Alternatively, you write it in the storage facility that we've got and leave it there. So that would be the other option. But then I don't think it'd be able to fit at the moment with everything else that we've got in there. Yeah, so.
We could also purchase a cover just to make sure so that, you know, that's easy enough to do. Well, on the basis of that, then my suggestion would be that we actually remove the current point 3 and replace it with a request that staff come back with some options of moving forward on the future of the Gawler Heritage Collection piano or something like that. Because I think what I'm hearing, I'd like to hear back from these, I'd like to have some information back from Jacinta on this and include things like we certainly would engage with the Barnett family about this process. That would be appropriate. And perhaps as part of the process, we would also write up the history of the Steinway and maybe as part of the deacquisition, there would be a launch of, you know, we would produce a pamphlet or something. There's lots of different options of recording the history and making sure that we've given it due credit if we decide to go down that line of deacquisition.
I'd like to suggest one thing is that I agree with Helen that we do some changes to this, but just to sit there with that ongoing, repeated year after year, nothing's happening, we can't afford it, there needs to be decisions made. And I would like to suggest, as one of those decisions, something along the lines of a business plan for our pianos. So if it was possible, and I know that the workers of the committee and the volunteers have a lot of work going on, can we get someone who's a music student to do some research around what is practical with the things that we've mentioned, like the atrium, or selling it off completely and deaccessioning, and what things we could use, what we could restore with the funds that we raise from the sale of it. What is the value of keeping it, not keeping it? It would be because this conversation I've been part of now for about 3 years, and nothing has really grown or developed. And in the meantime, the Steinway is just sitting in this one spot. So I think a really thorough, analysis and research around what are the options and what do we think would be the most beneficial to our collection and our history.
I'd support that. I think it needs to be staff with due, because this is an asset that has, and I think you're right. We have had reports back on this, or a report back on this before. I'm very much aware of that. I think over time, though, again, as we've developed and we understand the collection and the budget restraints, I think that another report with more emphasis perhaps on a potential deacquisition is where we're going. We're not saying we will, but we now need to have some firm thoughts about, some extra information.
Yes, because, sorry, Adrian, past conversation has been around, in the past meetings on this conversation, it's been around do we, don't we, not what are the options. So.
I think the idea of making it visible, putting it in that spot, because I've never seen it, and it's just something that I visualise as sitting in a shed somewhere. It'd be nice if you could get some visibility on it. And
it would, and it would also show very clearly the state of repair. Because, and I haven't seen it for 15 years. I only saw it, I think, once in the lifetime that it was dragged out. It's got, somebody's drilled in a hinged bolt so that could be locked. It's not been treated kindly in its life. And I think people, when they think Steinway, think of a wonderful, modern, a beautifully maintained thing, and that we haven't. So putting it on display actually will help getting some reality around it.
I have to agree, though. I think when you mentioned the atrium, David, that sounded really good. And as I walked here today, I was thinking that to find some place to display it and get some measure of what the community values, the community values it as well, would be beneficial to eventually. And even if the display was just to look at and see if that was financially viable with the cost of moving, etc., to the atrium for a while.
But we need, I guess, again, we need that report because there are costs. Staff have very clearly told us there's costs whichever way we go, but we need to do something. My point is we need to do something. So perhaps having a report back saying what it would cost to move, what it would cost to put the brace to the leg. I think we need to be careful about we did have a bit of a semi or very informal survey at one of the previous exhibitions. So I think we need to be very clear that while we accept feedback and we're informing the community, in the end it will come back to this, we welcome community input into it, but it may have to be a decision that we have to take. So given that the $80,000 I think has been at least 2, if not 3 budget cycles, and it's never making itself up from above the line, as we call it. It is never going to have that type of priority for this council. This council's got an awful lot on its plate. So, after 3 years of that, we need to revisit.
Paul?
Just want to clarify, I mean, if we move it to the atrium, are we actually saying we want it to be viewed for sale? Is that what we're saying? Because we could spend all this money to put it there and then look at it and then move it back into storage. So I just want to know what the step is.
Yeah, so through the chair, to clarify, and I'll do some wordsmithing in a moment on the resolution, because I personally still think that the community needs to be clear that we're not going to do this engagement on the restoration, because that was the process. We are supposed to be right now engaging on the potential restoration of the Steinway. So if we're now considering deaccessioning, then no, we can note that we're not going to do that engagement. It's not a rescission motion. We are now at this point in the process, so we're not going to do this engagement. And the second point would be that we bring a report back to the committee about what the options in terms of the potential deaccessioning are. That would include what the option is around moving it to the atrium, the costs associated with that. That is for the purposes of potential deaccession, sale, whatever that terminology may be, not for the purposes of engagement on restoration. And I think that's the point we're trying to be very clear on. We're not moving it there to say, come and tell us your grand ideas about investing in restoring it and putting it upstairs at the Institute for play, because we know it's not going to be concert level at any point. So if the committee's comfortable with that, I'll wordsmith with Connie in the side. You can continue to discuss, but yep.
Welcome, Jeffrey. Adrian.
Yeah, a while back I was going to try and get a point in, but it was sort of no, that's fine. It was something that Jacinta said, and she was talking about seeing new things coming into the centre, and because I go there on Wednesday, I see that, and it's always amazing the stuff that comes in. I just wonder if there's a place for some of those things to be spoken of here. I'm thinking of the Frank Hillier, a couple of boxes of stuff that came in from Frank Hillier, and they're quite fascinating the more you look at them, but I don't know whether...
Through the chair, the next report is actually a collections acquisition update. So that, so this report was written before the Hillier collection came in. So that will technically be reported on in 6 months' time. But while we're waiting, if you're happy for me to indulge, we received from the RSL a fabulous collection of items that was sent to them from a lady in the Northern Territory They were her grandfather's. He served in both World Wars. There were some very unusual items that are rarely seen in that package that came through the mail with, just all wrapped up in a big envelope. Some really lovely things. So they're an important part of First World War, particularly history. Some of them will come to the committee in reports about suggestions for art lab conservation in the new financial year. But they're, I suppose they're a reminder that in family collections there are extraordinary items, and part of our role as custodians of heritage is to encourage people to seek out places for items. Now, we generally get offered a piano once a month, which we politely decline. But in saying that, there are other items, and this lady had approached the RSL with this collection, and which was fabulous. She knew her grandfather had enlisted from Gawler and had grown up in Gawler, so she approached the RSL. Luckily, and we have such a strong working relationship with the RSL that they knew that these items needed specialist care. So they've said they can come to us, and the RSL have done that with a number of their more fragile items. And we've helped them with some of the items. We've provided high-level copies so that they can have copies of the things back at the RSL so people can get up close, but the original is safe. So we have a strong working relationship. And so these items will come. The RSL are doing an exhibition with the Cultural Heritage Centre as part of the History Festival, and we'll have those items on display as part of that.
Adrian, that was a spoiler alert.
Because I was in yesterday, and I just couldn't keep away from it. It's just this box of stuff, and there's some amazing things. There's because he was a driver, and he worked with the guns, like the Allied version of the one on the hill, and so he rode a horse and possibly towed the guns along, and there was a little bag that had some spurs in it, and we pulled the spurs out and took them out in the light, and it's got his service number stamped into it. And so this sort of stuff, and there's like a make and mend kit with needles and cotton. Yeah, and anyway, there's 50 plus individual items. Yeah, and I think it's quite rare to have a collection like that. And so the guy was enrolled in 1915, so he went through the entire war, and did the same again in the Second World War. Frank Hillier? Anyway.
Okay, we'll come back to number 4. Request council staff to present a report to a future Gawler Heritage Collection Committee meeting on the potential deaccessioning of the Steinway piano and the process and costs associated with such deaccessioning. Do we have anyone wanting to move that? Helen?
I'm happy to put my name to it. I think it's, I think we're taking a hard decision. Well, we're moving down the line of this decision, but I'm very comfortable, and I'm very comfortable to, as I say, engage with the appropriate parts of the community to make sure that they are understanding the process that we now face.
Anyone like to second that? Adrian, have you got something? Yes, yeah. That would get fixed eventually. Yeah. Anyone want to second that? Paul? So moved by Helen and seconded by Paul. Oh, Jeffy, were you in favour of that motion? Were you in favour of that motion?
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
So that was... Jacinta, would you like to look at that?
Thank you. Through the Chair, this is our March acquisitions update report, the list of the items that were accepted into the collection under the Gawler Heritage Collection policy. Of particular interest was the photographic files of the 86th Squadron who were serving in New Guinea. So the collection has the Eagle mascot that the squadron stole from the Eagle Foundry and took with them to New Guinea as their mascot, and a family have in their possession a wonderful photographic album taken by their soldier who was serving in New Guinea, and that's a prized possession of that family, understandably. But they allowed us, after speaking with us and developing a relationship with the Cultural Heritage Centre, they've allowed us to copy all of the photographs in the album as digital copies. That will stay in the collection, but they're an incredible resource for academics and people interested in the 86th Squadron and the New Guinea campaign. Most of these have never been seen before. They give incredible insight into the mechanics, the way they dealt with the planes, how they hid the planes from enemy air force above. They're really quite extraordinary photographs, and we feel very grateful to the family for entrusting us with digital copies, but ensuring that they're available for the wider community to see, because they're very, very special.
Adrian.
How many photographs? Or is it?
From memory, there are about 35.
Helen.
Yeah, congratulations. It's always really exciting to see this, and the fact that the community is coming forward and giving us these type of items. Particularly note the family history books coming in. That's how the collection started, with people coming and donating their copies. And I think that is, I think we need to continue to publicise that, because that's the way we've grown a fairly substantial collection, which now is probably going to be quite unique. I can only think of 2 or 3 places that people now store those family history collections. So, yeah, I think it's just continuing. That's part of our policies when we allow stuff is to ask for people to donate their copies back as well. So I think in time, and with lots of excellent cataloguing, that will become quite a strength in our collection.
Paul.
Yeah, it's great to see all this coming in. I'm just wondering, how's our storage situation? Because we don't want to get a position where we just run out of storage.
So, through the Chair, the storage situation is fine. We've rehoused a lot of bulky items. There was a great many big tubs of excess books from the reading room that have been catalogued. They've been rehoused into more appropriate archival storage. That's allowed us, and it's allowed us to use the vault in a better way, so that the vault has fixed shelving, slate shelving. And it's a lovely space in there, and that it's very stable, but it's allowed us to use that space better. So we're not concerned about storage at the moment. When we think this is all that we've accepted in 6 months, so we haven't been inundated, apart with Office and Pianos. We have a very clear policy, and obviously staff adhere to that. And things that we're being offered are unique. For instance, the christening gown. Now, there are lots of families that have christening gowns. This christening gown was made in Gawler and worn by 3 generations of a Gawler family. So that's a fairly unique christening gown. So we accepted that into the collection. The photographs, they're easy to store. There were physical ones of the railways in the 1960s and 70s. So we're not concerned about storage at this stage.
Would anyone like to move that? Adrian? Second, Paul. All in favour? Is there an updated motions list? Okay. So the heritage exhibition I've got written here, 8.2 heritage exhibition.
So through the chair, if I may, I just thought this would be an opportunity to update the committee on the heritage exhibition and the history festival events that we'll be involved with. In the first instance, the history festival, the launch of the history festival Gawler brochure event is next Thursday at 5:30 p.m. As we have in previous years, the Mayor has called a network together and we've all worked across Gawler to provide a very varied calendar of events, different times, different activities, and I think the community will be very pleased at what's available to them here. So that will be launched next week. The Cultural Heritage Centre has 6 events for the History Festival. 2 of the larger events are Rosemary Cadden, who's a journalist who retook the exhibition, the route of McDougall Sturt from Adelaide right through to the Northern Territory. She's written a book about that, and she's going to speak about that from a modern perspective, looking at his route and his diaries and giving a modern view at what he saw that's still in the space. So that should be very interesting. We've got Professor Benjamin Mountford, who's coming over from Victoria to speak to us about the gold rushes and their impact in South Australia, which is a lot more than most people realise, because it was part of an international worldwide movement of people moving for gold. So he's also a huge advocate of the importance of history. He has a growing young faculty of young historians who sign up and work with him. So he's a very interesting person. So I've asked him to come across and he'll be talking about the gold rush, but he'll also be talking about why heritage and these stories and why new research is still very important. There can be a thought in that why do we, the gold rushes were over 150 years ago, why do we need to keep studying them? And he will argue the case for the continual study of history as well. And he's also very keen to have access to our collection to see, and we do have some quite important items. We have diaries of people who went to the gold rushes. We have pistols that they took to protect themselves. So we have some interesting items that will further the knowledge. So he's very interested to come to Gawler and do that. So we're doing that. And we're also working with the RSL to help them mount a week-long exhibition of their treasures in much the same way as we did with the CWA a couple of years ago. So we're just giving them some support to tell some of their stories, not all of their stories, and to have that going on in the Civic Centre. So they're the events that we're involved with, and we'll have guided tours of our new exhibition. Our new exhibition is opening on May the 1st. We'll be sending out invitations next week. It was finalised last week. My thanks to Helen, who was very helpful, going back and forth, doing lots of revisions, spelling and grammar checks. I see it so many times I can't see it anymore, and it's always very helpful to have another set of eyes. And Helen and Judy normally have done that for our last few exhibitions, but Judy obviously was unable to, but Helen did that, so we've worked on that. The current exhibition will finish on the end of next week. We will deinstall starting the following Monday. We have a week and a half. We should be ready in a week, but we always like an extra couple of days in case something goes wrong and a piece of the wall falls down. The joy of old buildings. But it's all going ahead according to plan, so we're very pleased with that.
Helen.
Yeah, thank you very much for the update. And congratulations too on the 2-page spread in the Bunyip on the details of the History Festival. And I did note that the acting CEO pointed out that this year is the 20th year that we've been involved in the History Festival. It's not the 20th festival, because I think originally it was biannual, but we've had a long involvement, so it's great, and some of the speakers will be good. And I understand that the History Advocate is coming up as part of that as well. Perhaps some more details on why, perhaps?
So through the chair, the History Advocate, Dr. Kira Lindsay, I was speaking to her last week, and she's been to Gawler before. She was at the launch of our brochure last year. she's very interested in the model of cultural heritage as an economic driver and a tourism lever. So she was very keen, she's been very keen to come up, and as the history advocate, she likes to support different events. And when she saw Professor Mountford was coming, she thought this would be of particular interest. So she will be here, as I said in my email to the committee. If you're available, she was keen to speak to committee members and all of the people involved with and supportive of a different view of cultural heritage and cultural heritage tourism.
Paul.
Yeah, I'm glad you've used those words, because I was going to ask about the statement of significance, whether that affects cultural tourism and what benefit that has.
So through the chair, there are a subset of the community who are very interested and passionate and academic, and they will be impressed. It's been my experience in my working life that for the community, when you present stories in an attractive way that they can resonate with and they see themselves in part of the story, not the whole story, but a part of the story. We always want to be able to go into an exhibition and see something that makes us question something, that makes us think about something. So that's learning in an exhibition. So for many of our community members, as long as we continue to tell our stories and they see themselves reflected in their stories, that will matter to them a great deal more than our statement of significance. In terms of funding applications down the track and interactions with organisations such as the Copland Foundation, it will be certainly helpful to have. Yeah. So it's I think one of the things that you do when you are trying to embed a cultural organisation into a community is you touch people, many people in different ways. And if you do that well, then you have longevity. If you're very narrow and focused only in one particular area, then you miss a broad group. And as we know, and I'd be very interested to speak to Professor Mountford about this, there's less and less teaching of history in school. So we need to, no offence, but there's nobody under 20 in the room. So if we need to connect with young people, we need to be able to get them interested in the history, and the ways that you do that is through exhibitions.
Okay, does anyone want to move that? No moving? No moving happening.
No, I'm just going to jump in one last time. The effects, I think Professor Mountford will be fabulous. I hadn't realised his passion for the study of history will be spot on, I think, and very relevant to us and to our community. But the whole gold things, the gold effects on the community of Gawler are long-reaching. Not only the Barossa goldfields and the Victorian goldfields, but the next generation then went to Western Australia, and there's still families in Gawler today who benefited from some of the money that came back from Western Australia as well. So, and yeah, I think that'll be, I'm not surprised he wants to have a look at some of the objects that we have around that area. So, yeah, well done.
Questions without notice? Paul.
Is there any update on the gun, the crop field gun? Because there was an application went in.
So through the chair, as far as I'm aware, the RSL have not received any information, so we're waiting on the outcome of that, and I'm sure we would have heard if they had. So we don't really know any more.
No further questions without notice? Okay, motions without notice? None? So we will declare the meeting closed at 5:05. Thank you.